Good afternoon and welcome to Lunch Break Live with Tea Party Patriots Action. I'm Bill Pasco, Tea Party Patriots man in Washington, and I am flying solo today. I'll be giving you both the Washington Report and the call to action for Monday, June 10th, 2024. So let's get right to it. The House and Senate will return Tuesday and stay in session through Friday. Last week in the House returned on Monday and voted to pass two bills under suspension of the rules. On Tuesday, the House voted to pass a rule governing floor consideration of two bills. Then the House took up H.R. 8580, the Military Construction Veterans Affairs Appropriations Bill for fiscal year 2025. After considering 5 amendments, 4 of which were agreed to, the House broke the sequence to vote on H.R. 8282, the Illegitimate Court Counteraction Act. The bill passed by a vote of 247 to 155. On Wednesday, the House returned to consideration of the FY 2025 Military Construction Veterans Affairs Appropriations Bill. The House considered and agreed to 3 more amendments, then voted on the bill as amended. It passed by a vote of 209 to 197, and then they were done. This week in the House will return tomorrow with the first vote set for 6:30 p.m. At that time, the House is scheduled to consider 11 bills under suspension of the rules. On Wednesday and for the balance of the week, the House will consider an as-yet unnumbered House resolution recommending that the House find Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress for refusal to comply with a subpoena issued by the Judiciary Committee. That's the case where the Judiciary Committee wants to hear the audio recording of Joe Biden's 5-hour interview with Special Counsel Robert Hur. The House will also vote on H.R. 8070, the Service Member Quality of Life Improvement and National Defense Authorization Act for FY 2025. Last week in the Senate came back on Monday and voted to invoke cloture on the nomination of Christopher T. Hansen to be a member of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. On Tuesday, the Senate voted to confirm him to that position. Then the Senate voted to invoke cloture on and then to confirm the nomination of Tanya Monique Jones-Bozier to be an associate judge of the Superior Court of the District of Columbia. Then the Senate voted to invoke cloture on the nomination of Judith E. Pipe to be an associate judge of the Superior Court of the District of Columbia. On Wednesday, the Senate voted to confirm her to that position. Then the Senate voted to invoke cloture on the nomination of Stephanie Sanders Sullivan to be representative of the United States of America to the African Union. Then the Senate tried but failed to invoke cloture on the motion to proceed to S. 4381, a bill to protect an individual's ability to access contraception and to engage in contraception and to protect a healthcare provider's ability to provide contraceptives, contraception, and information related to contraception. Just 2 Republicans, Maine's Susan Collins and Alaska's Lisa Murkowski, voted for the motion to proceed. And then they were done. This week in the Senate will return Tuesday with the first vote set for 5:30 p.m. At that time, the Senate will proceed to a roll call vote on the motion to invoke cloture on the nomination of David Rosner to be a member of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission for a term expiring June 30, 2027. Then, based on the Majority Leader's cloture filings, I anticipate we'll also see votes on the nominations of Lindsay S. C. to be a member of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission for a term expiring June 30, 2028, and Judy W. Chang to be a member of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission for a term expiring June 30, 2029. We should also anticipate a vote on a motion to proceed to S. 4445, a bill to protect and expand nationwide access to fertility treatment, including in vitro fertilization. Now let's talk about Fauci on the hot seat. Last Monday got off to a fast start in the House. The Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic of the House Oversight and Accountability Committee held a hearing featuring testimony from Dr. Anthony Fauci, who, when he was in federal government service, was the highest paid employee on the federal payroll, and now in retirement, draws retirement benefits that pay him more than the annual salary of the President of the United States. But that's not why he was asked to testify before the committee. He was asked to come in so the committee could ask him about his handling of the coronavirus pandemic? Specifically, did he deliberately try to hide evidence that the entire COVID pandemic may have started as the result of a lab leak from a lab that was using U.S. taxpayer dollars to conduct dangerous research? Fauci denied it and insisted that he had always kept what he called an open mind on the question of a lab leak. The committee referred to earlier testimony from other senior government scientists and emails that had been made public, emails from Fauci to subordinates and colleagues that indicated otherwise. It was, to say the least, a contentious hearing in which Republicans competed with each other to see who could inflict the most damage on Fauci, while Democrats competed with each other to see who could suck up to Fauci the most. On Friday, House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan followed up, sending a letter to Fauci, care of Fauci's attorneys, requesting that Fauci appear for a transcribed interview. Wrote Jordan, quote, "The Committee on the Judiciary and Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government are conducting oversight of how and to what extent the executive branch has coerced or colluded with companies and other intermediaries to censor Americans' speech. We believe that you are uniquely positioned to aid the committee's oversight, as you served as Chief Medical Advisor to President Biden and Chief Medical Advisor for President Biden's COVID-19 response team. During your tenure, the response team participated in extensive efforts to unconstitutionally monitor and censor American speech on social media platforms. Accordingly, we request that you appear for a transcribed interview and produce documents relevant to our investigation." End quote. Jordan went further in the letter, basically calling Fauci a liar to his face regarding Fauci's Monday testimony. Quote, "On June 3, 2024, you testified before the Oversight Committee's Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic that you have, quote, kept an open mind, unquote, about the lab leak theory and did not play a part in the, quote, push to downplay the lab leak theory, end quote. This is false on its face. It is also contradicted by Facebook's decision to remove content about the lab leak theory because of, quote, pressure from the Biden administration, unquote, particularly the response team of which you were a member, end quote. Jordan went on to say, recent reporting from the Select Subcommittee indicates Fauci may have taken part in a conspiracy to, quote, destroy or, quote, hide official records regarding the pandemic. Fauci's not out of the hot seat yet. Stay tuned. Now to the border crisis. Joe Biden, desperate to find a way to turn the page on the border crisis, resorted to throwing spaghetti on the wall just to see if it would stick. I refer, of course, to his announcement last Tuesday of a new executive order that he said would allow him to employ authority granted him by Section 212F of the 1996 Immigration and Nationality Act. Under the authority given to the executive branch in that 28-year-old law, Biden can close the border, even to asylum seekers, when he believes leaving it open would be to the detriment of the United States. Accordingly, Biden declared that if and when border encounters reach 2,500 per day, the border between points of entry would be closed to asylum seekers. Biden is hoping that by appearing to do something on the border, he will move numbers on the public's perception of his handling of the border crisis. It's not going to work. He's made a fundamental strategic error. He's failed to acknowledge that in the campaign communications wars, the guy who wins is not the guy who's got the best argument. It's the guy who controls what they're arguing about. They're laughing today over at Trump campaign headquarters, and they will continue to laugh every day Biden tries to talk about the border crisis, because all that does is draw voter attention to what's going on at the border. Biden can blame Republicans all he wants. He can hold his breath until his face turns blue, too. It's not going to change voters' perceptions of who's to blame for the crisis at the border. They know who started this crisis, and they know what he did to launch this crisis. They know Biden essentially put out the welcome sign even before he arrived at the White House. He did it during the 2020 campaign. For instance, as early as May of 2019, he promised to provide health care to everyone in America, quote, regardless of whether they are documented or undocumented, end quote. He promised to reverse the previous administration's restrictions on funding so-called sanctuary jurisdictions that refused to assist in the enforcement of federal immigration law, and then delivered on that promise. He promised to end construction on the border wall, and then made good on that promise early in his administration. He promised to end the Trump administration's Remain in Mexico policy, under which asylum seekers were required to wait in Mexico for their asylum claim to be adjudicated in a U.S. immigration court. And then he delivered on that promise. He promised to push for amnesty for illegal aliens, and on his very first day in office, he sent an immigration bill to Congress, the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021, quote, to restore humanity and American values to our immigration system, end quote, by creating a mass amnesty program for illegal aliens. Millions heard those promises and interpreted them as what they were, an invitation to come to America. And they responded to the invitation, setting records month after month for encounters at the southern border, as evidenced by the counts maintained by U.S. Customs and Border Protection. 1,438,236 encounters in FY 2021 from February through September. More in 2023, and just in 2024 year to date, another 1,520,213. All told, we're looking at 7.8 million encounters just since Biden took office. Not surprisingly, this open borders policy that's created this mass illegal immigration crisis has had a negative impact on Biden and his job approval ratings. The most recent TIPP Insights poll, fielded May 29 to 31 among 1,910 U.S. adults, shows that the worst issue for Biden is immigration, where 57% of those surveyed gave him a grade of D or F, while just 21% gave him an A or B. Among independents, it was even worse. Fully 60% gave him a D or F. Biden can try to blame it on Republicans, but voters just aren't buying. Now to the latest on Hunter Biden's trial. Hunter Biden went on trial Monday for 3 felony counts related to his October 2018 purchase of a Colt firearm in a Delaware gun shop. Special counsel David Weiss charged the president's son with 2 counts of lying about his drug use when he filled out a federally required purchase form, and he was also charged with possession of a firearm while being a drug user. That's illegal under federal law. The 3 charges together could yield a sentence of up to 25 years in prison, but as a nonviolent first-time offender, it's deemed unlikely by those who know such things that Biden would receive a prison sentence even if he were to be found guilty of all 3 charges. Defense attorney Abby Lowell made clear his initial defense early on. It's clear his intent is to show the jury that the federal government cannot prove that Hunter was using drugs or under the influence of drugs at the very moment he made the purchase. If that's the case, then the judge's instructions to the jury will be very important. Must the government prove that Hunter was under the influence at the moment he filled out the forms? Or is it enough for the government to have proven that Hunter was using drugs before and after he filled out the forms? And that might work for the 2 charges related to filling out the form falsely. But how does that help on the gun possession charge? Hunter owned the weapon for 11 days, and I'm pretty sure, based on text messages that were introduced into evidence, that it's clear to the jury that Hunter was using drugs at some point during the 11 days after he purchased the weapon. That same day, of course, the federal government introduced into evidence Hunter's notorious laptop, what the New York Post's Miranda Devine labeled the laptop from hell in her book of the same name. The laptop was, when it was first introduced to the public in October 20, just weeks before the 2020 election, labeled a fraud and a forgery and dismissed by 51 current and former intelligence community professionals as, quote, bearing all the hallmarks of a Russian disinformation operation, end quote, as a means to squelch the stories it spawned. Since then, of course, we've learned that the federal government, in the form of the FBI, had the laptop for 8 months before its October 2020 public introduction, and the FBI had already vetted it and verified its contents as authentic. The FBI and the DOJ used it as evidence against the son of the president who was elected by denying its authenticity. Meanwhile, on Wednesday, the chairman of the three House committees tasked with leading the House's impeachment investigation into President Biden, the Ways and Means Committee, the Judiciary Committee, and the Oversight and Accountability Committees, sent a 65-page referral to the Attorney General of the United States, referring Hunter Biden and his uncle James Biden, the president's brother, to the department for prosecution for lying to Congress during the investigation. Now to the latest on anti-Trump lawfare. Last Wednesday, the Georgia Court of Appeals put a hold on Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis's prosecution against former President Trump and his colleagues until it hears the case to disqualify Willis in October. The court has tentatively scheduled a hearing date for October 4. Trump and his co-defendants are seeking to have Willis disqualified from the case for having an improper relationship with her former special counsel, Nathan Wade. Now for the latest 2024 campaign update. The most important campaign 2024 update of the week is this. Last Tuesday, former President Trump and the Republican National Committee announced the launch of what they're calling the 2024 Swamp the Vote USA effort, in which they're urging every Republican voter to use, quote, every appropriate tool to beat the Democrats, unquote, including early voting and absentee voting. This is a major reversal for Trump, who had previously condemned in-person early voting and absentee voting. This is a big deal. Now to the Jenny Beth Show. The Jenny Beth Show dropped 2 episodes last week. On Wednesday, episode 69, featuring Jenny Beth's conversation with Dave Williams, chairman of the Colorado Republican Party and a candidate for the GOP nomination for Congress in Colorado's 5th congressional district, dropped. And on Friday, episode 70, featuring Jenny Beth's discussion with Ron Hanks, candidate for the GOP nomination for Congress in Colorado's 3rd district. That's the district currently represented by Republican Lauren Boebert, which she is vacating. Both conversations focus on current issues these candidates are hearing from the grassroots as they campaign in contested primaries that will be decided on June 25th. And that's our Washington report for this week. Now to the call to action. As you know, we've been talking for the last several months about the threat to election integrity posed by non-citizen voting. A few weeks ago, in the House and Senate, allied members introduced legislation to prevent non-citizen voting, the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, also known as the SAVE Act. In the House, the bill is H.R. 8281. In the Senate, it's S. 4292. The bill would amend the 1993 National Voter Registration Act, also known as the Motor Voter Law, to require that states obtain documentary proof of citizenship before registering someone to vote. The call to action is simple. Please call your congressman or congresswoman and your 2 United States senators and ask them to add their names as co-sponsors to this important legislation. The Biden administration has allowed almost 10 million illegal immigrants to enter our country over the last 3.5 years. If even 1% were to register and then vote, that could be enough to sway the outcome of an election, including the presidential election. Please call your congressman or congresswoman and your 2 United States senators and ask them to sign on as co-sponsors of the SAVE Act. And that's our call to action for this week. As always, if you'd like to get in touch with us directly, send an email to jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. That's jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. And if you want to ask a question and have me answer it during our next broadcast, simply add "for broadcast" to the subject line. We'll see you next week. Until then, be well and be active.